before, but there's some new details. So for those that don't know, this right here is what was given to the medical examiner, and they said this was the noose found around Jeffrey Epstein's neck. The medical examiner did his examination believing that what he was given was what was actually found on him. It was later discovered that this actually was not what was used. Now, how this happened, nobody's ever been able to explain. But there's some important details as to why this may have been given to the medical examiner and why this may be related to the cover-up. Now, as we go down, before we get to why that is, I do want you to look at this knot right here. I want you to look at this frayed edge right here. If you look at the flat lines that go across it, to me, this doesn't look like somebody who tore this by hand. Now, Jeffrey Epstein had an arm injury.
They gave the wrong noose to the medical examiner, and the FBI knew. Let that sink in for just a second. The single most important piece of evidence in one of the most watched deaths in modern American history, and the people running the investigation handed over the wrong one. No explanation, no correction, no accountability, just silence. And you already knew something was wrong. You knew it the moment they told you Jeffrey Epstein hanged himself in a maximum security federal prison while the cameras were down, while the guards were asleep, while the whole world was waiting for him to talk. You knew, because you are not the kind of person who just accepts what they tell you on the news and goes back to sleep. Here is what the files actually show. The noose given to the medical examiner was not the ligature found on Jeffrey Epstein's body. The medical examiner performed his entire examination believing the evidence in front of him was real. It was not. And nobody, not the FBI, not the Bureau of Prisons, not a single federal official went back and corrected it. The real ligature, what investigators believe was the actual one used, was sitting in the corner of the cell. Untested, untouched for the purposes of DNA collection, just sitting there. And here is where it gets darker. That real ligature had only one known person who touched it, a correctional officer who reportedly tore it from Epstein's neck. One person. Which means the DNA inside, the knot, deep inside where casual handling cannot reach, where skin cells from whoever tied it would still be preserved, that DNA was never collected, never tested, never even discussed as a priority. Why? Why would you skip that? Unless you already knew what it would show. Look at the internal FBI text messages pulled from these files. Agents texting each other about whether to test the ligature for DNA.
Next up top, I'm going to read through these. ADIC getting questions as expected after the Fox interview. Did we test the ligature for DNA? No. The only people that had access to Epstein were the guards. They for sure touched the noose, so no need to have it tested. Additionally, BOP did not secure it prior to us taking custody, so we did not know who all touched it. Negative. The COs were the only ones to have access to Jeffrey Epstein, and they were known to have touched it. Removal. Additionally, it was not secure before we took custody, so unknown who all may have touched it. So there's a couple of extremely important points you have to consider.
And the answer they gave themselves was no. Their reasoning? The guards had touched it.
Here. One is that the FBI is preemptively narrowing the scope of evidence they're going to look at. The noose or ligature would be the central piece of evidence in this entire investigation. And you can make elimination samples. You can eliminate if you think you know who touched it, you can eliminate those people. You can create samples to eliminate the correctional officers, for example. But what's even more consequential is the fact that there is a deep and tight knot. If someone tied that with their bare hands, there would be cells in the middle of it. And those cells would not be mixed in with anybody that had casually touched the noose, anybody who had picked it up or handled it. The cells inside, deep inside the knot, could still be intact, and they absolutely could have gotten a sample from that. Stranger still is that the ligature we just looked at wasn't even.
So there was no point, but every forensic professional in this country knows you can create elimination samples. You test the guards separately, you rule them out, you look for whoever is left. That is basic. That is day one of any serious death investigation. These are federal agents. They know this. So when they chose not to do it, that was not incompetence. That was a decision. And decisions like that do not get made by accident. They get made by people who are protecting something much bigger than a prison cell. And now you have to ask yourself, who exactly were they protecting? Because it was not just the DNA they skipped. A retired LA County Sheriff's deputy reached out to the FBI with a technique used routinely in strangulation cases, examining bedsheet fibers under high-powered microscopes.
Shredded paper coming out. It was higher than normal. and it was so significant to him that he felt the need to contact the FBI. And here's specifically what's said. We're going to get this reported several different ways, but we're going to go over all of it. Blank is a federal corrections officer reporting misconduct. He works at the MCC. Blank has never seen this amount of bags of shredded documents coming out to be put in the dumpster at the rear gate of the MCC. There was a BOP after actions team that came, and they're supposed to review what happened. So basically, he goes on to explain that there are a couple of inmates that help work back there, and that he helped Blank throw the bags of shredded documents into the dumpster. He was bringing back bags of shredded papers, around 4 or 5 bags, and the caller brought them into the gate to throw them into the dumpster. Blank told the caller that the after-action team is shredding huge amounts of paperwork. Caller found it suspicious that an after-action team charged with investigating would be shredding huge amounts of paperwork with all of the officials from AIG FBI.
If the fibers run in one direction, the person likely did it themselves. If they run in multiple directions, a third party was involved. Standard technology, used in counties across this country for years. Jeffrey Epstein's death was the highest profile case of that entire decade, and they did not run a single fiber test, not one. We had federal agents, we had the state of New York, we had the Bureau of Prisons, and collectively, the sum total of their forensic investigation was a medical examination and a case closure. The files make this plain. This was not a real investigation, and the people who were supposed to demand one, the institutions, the media, the oversight bodies, every single one of them looked away, just like they always do when the names involved are powerful enough. You know how this works. We all know how this works. And then came the shredding. Days after Epstein's death, a federal corrections officer stationed at the rear gate of the MCC watched bag after bag after bag of shredded documents come out of that building.
Yeah. So basically, this person says they have a point of contact in Nashville that's a retired LA County Sheriff's deputy, that they had dealt with people that had ligatures before, or who had had sheets wrapped around their neck. And what it says is, he said the one piece of evidence they found was helpful was examining the fibers of bedding under a high-powered microscope. So in other words, if all of the fibers were facing one direction, it was probably something someone did themselves, but if they were going multiple directions, it was more likely strangulation. There's so many different types of technology that people have used in LA County and elsewhere that were not done here. And as this individual says, if the sheet fibers were laying both directions, it was more likely that a third party was involved in some way, because the sheets would have been pulled over the anchor point by someone else and then shifted forward from the weight of the individual. So this is technology that is routinely used in somewhere like...
He said he had never seen that volume in his entire career. It shook him enough that he contacted the FBI directly. He told them the BOP after action team, the very team sent to review what happened, was the one doing the shredding. Think about that. The investigators were destroying the evidence, and someone with a southern accent nobody at the facility recognized was directing inmates to make sure every last box was included. 4 bags, 5 bags, more the next day. All of it headed for a dumpster scheduled for pickup before anyone could intervene. The officer who reported it was specific. He gave a timeline. He gave a deadline. He told the FBI exactly when the truck was coming. And what did the FBI do with that information? They interviewed the inmate who was physically carrying the bags to the trash. They asked him if he knew what was being shredded. He said no. Of course he said no. He was carrying garbage bags. He had no idea what was inside them. And with that, the FBI closed the thread. They never found the man with the southern accent. They never intercepted the shredded material. They never treated it as the obstruction of justice it clearly was. They just moved on. Because that is what you do when you are not actually looking for the truth. 150 pages. That is how much of the investigation files are fully redacted.
Now, I deleted a bunch of pages because it's so obscenely long, but we go completely redacted from 828 all the way to 971. So there's 150 pages fully redacted. However, there is one page at the very end that is unredacted. This is the only one. And it says, subject, it appears there is new information about the phone call at 7:17 p.m. Friday night. The warden briefed OIG that the call was 19 minutes long. I did not brief the warden on any information regarding that call. Point being is we have 150 pages of redacted material, and the very last page talks about the call that Jeffrey Epstein made from prison.
Not names, not witness identities, not victim information. Everything. Entire pages blacked out with no legal justification that holds up to any reasonable scrutiny. There is no active investigation to protect. There are no ongoing proceedings being shielded. There is just silence. 150 consecutive pages of silence. And the one page left unredacted at the very end, it references a 19-minute phone call Jeffrey Epstein made from prison the Friday night before his body was found. 19 minutes. To whom? About what? The files do not say, because everything around it has been buried. And that phone call sitting there in the middle of a wall of black ink is not an accident. That is a breadcrumb left just visible enough to remind you that someone, somewhere, knows exactly what was said on that call and has spent years making sure you never find out. There is a camera in that prison. There is footage of a correctional officer pulling something white out of a blue trash can and carrying it up to the tier where Epstein was housed.
Footage. What it says is general movement is observed around the area of people, appear to be officers and inmates still cleaning and performing janitorial services. At one point, a blue trash can was pushed in front of the J-tier stairs, and the CO pushing it went up the J-tier carrying something white that was picked out of the blue trash can. So it sounds like they very clearly observed somebody pulling something out of the trash can and carrying it up to one of the tiers where the inmates are staying. It's saying a correctional officer actually did this. But that's the only detail they're giving us. Now here's some footage we actually do have. It's somewhat less dramatic, but I want to...
That footage was noted in FBI surveillance logs. That footage was never released. There is additional footage from 30 minutes before Epstein's body was discovered. Footage that exists, that the FBI reviewed, that has never been made public. And the blueprints included in the files show clearly that someone could travel from the elevator to Epstein's cell in a matter of seconds.
We're going to look at the blueprints that are included here. They actually included the blueprints of the MCC. And if you look over here, this is the area you were just looking at. And Jeffrey Epstein's cell is right here. So if someone was to come in and go up to Jeffrey Epstein's cell, they would come in through the elevators right here, and they would walk this way and up these stairs. So as we've seen this before, this is the individual coming up the stairs. They would have come up through the elevator, across this way, and up these stairs. So hopefully that illustrates how somebody could come from this elevator right up to where Jeffrey Epstein's cell is in only a matter.
The FBI mapped that path. They labeled those elevators. They noted those access points. You do not do that if you believe a man acted alone. You do not map entry routes into a cell if you have already decided it was a suicide. The investigation itself proves they were not convinced, and yet the official story never changed. This is what they do. They run just enough of an investigation to say they investigated. They ask just enough questions to say they asked. They interview just enough people, always the wrong ones, to say they tried. And then they close the file and they dare you to question it. They count on most people being too busy, too tired, or too afraid of being called names to keep pushing. But you are still here. You are still watching. You are still asking. And that means something. It means the people who gave their careers and their safety to report what they saw inside that prison did not do it for nothing. It means the guard who called the FBI about those shredded documents still deserves an answer. It means the fibers on those sheets, the DNA inside that knot, the name of the man with the southern accent, all of it still matters. Justice does not have an expiration date, not for the victims, not for the truth. So I want to ask you directly, if the FBI knew the noose was wrong, knew the DNA was never tested, knew documents were being shredded during an active investigation and did nothing, then who exactly were they working for? Leave your answer below, because I think you already know.